So thank you, everyone. My name is Bianca. I'm the Head of English and Maths at Uxbridge College, which is part of the Harrow, Richmond and Uxbridge College group. And I've been working in FE for the last 20 years, which seems like a really long time now. And I've been in the RESET since it started. So I feel like a pioneer. You know, I've done quite a few years in this, and I'm just really interested in reading and really getting our readers to want to read in class. So this is sort of all about sort of practical ways that you can get your learners to get really sort of engaged with the reading and want to read rather than having to read for them as well. So my first question is, why won't they read? There's been a lot of articles written recently. You can write in the chat, why do you think kids don't want to read? So you're welcome to contribute in the chat now if you want to type a message into the chat. Why do you think that our learners don't want to read? Yep, so there's vocabulary, indolence, bad experience, yep, too engrossed in social media, apathy, angry at failing, seen as a punishment, lack confidence, too much social media, excellent, boring, fantastic. Now, it's interesting, but I've read quite a lot of the literature recently, and I find that there seems to be a lot of focus, just like the comments in the chat, about what readers can't do, what they find difficult, and what they don't like. And I like to always sort of flip that on its head. So when I go into my own classes, I teach quite a lot as well. We can compete with TikTok, Rashid, I promise you. So I've just found that I've really just taken the ball by the horns and started to use my own teacher agency a lot. And I was reading up on it. I've written a little article which they have graciously published on the RESET Hub as well about this, and sort of looking at an approach which is called funds of knowledge. All the references are in that article, so if you want to read it, that would be great as well. My little blog post that I wrote. So, and it moves away from a teacher knowing the learners only from their performance within rather limited classroom contexts. And I think this is what we really need to move away from, is that the learners have done this before and they've been known by their English teachers. And a lot of us have probably heard that learners say things like, my teacher didn't like me at school. And so there is this sort of negativity around their own perception of themselves as readers. And we probably see them as quite limited as well ourselves, because they've obviously got grades 2 or grade 3, but we can use our teacher agency to actually move towards this funds of knowledge and use our learners as so that much of the teaching and learning becomes motivated by the children's interests and their own questions about life and seeing their own sort of lived experiences come alive in the classroom as well. So how can we engage reluctant learners in the classroom? Again, a lot of the reading is in that article. So by making reading a means of making sense of both of ourselves and of the world, you know, how many texts have we read, and we've read them and we've understood ourselves better as a result of them, and we can really we can do that with our own learners in our classrooms as well. We can see our own students as a cognitive resource as well. They know stuff about the world. They're not, just because they don't have cultural references that we believe should be their cultural references, they've got their own cultural references, and it's exciting to hear their own opinions and their own perspectives of the world. So being able to start with that starting point is really fun as well. So positioning students as active makers of meaning as well is really interesting, when students are interpreting a text not by what we have deemed as the correct response from that text. I think at school they've probably had a lot of literature learning, and it can be quite formulated as well, and they have to respond in a certain way, but having that freedom in our classrooms to actually open the door up to a different sort of response, a more emotive response from them as well, is really important. And like I said, by inviting other responses that are more than the merely formalist. So we often use our writing frames for them to write their responses and do, you know, they have to do a what, where, why, and explain, you know, the vocabulary, zoom in and all those kinds of things, which is great for the exam. But how about we don't do that in every lesson, you know, just letting them be free to respond to texts in different ways as well. And obviously, as we do a lot, we bring students' interests in the world beyond the classroom into a productive relationship with reading. So reading about things they're interested in. And so a lot of what I try to do in my own in my own practice and within my own department as well, because obviously responsible for the English department at the college as well. And what I really like to use is students' lived experiences, connecting with their actual lives. So I'm just going to go through a few little lesson slides and just talk you through a few examples of what I've actually done in lessons and what our department has done in lessons. And so the first lesson, rather than being an induction lesson on why is English important, why do we need English, it was just about their names. It was inspired by, so it's inspired by the Starbucks advert about the names on the cups. And I really enjoyed that. And I thought, everybody's got a name, everybody can actually sort of identify with this. So we did a text related to names. It was the first lesson. Students could engage with that. And a lot of connecting with learners' lives is by doing some pre-reading tasks which connect to the learners themselves. So, what do you think about her name? Where do you think it's from? And in that respect, you get to hear a lot about learners' cultural background and cultural experiences. We are in the area of Greater London, so we've got a huge amount of nationalities as well. And it's really important that we learn from learners as well. So, they might know that Esperanza is a Spanish name. It might come from an Indian child who's got Spanish history in their background, and they can talk about things and engage with them without feeling that they're wrong or anything like that. So then they read the text, and the questions based on the text are really simple. And I think simple reading comprehension is really, really important as well, and making sure that learners can access the text. Not by choosing texts which are really easy, but making sure that there are some challenging expressions in the text, but actually making sure that they can engage with the text through the pre-reading task, where you're building up the learners' expectations of what the text should be, and then bringing them through the text through a series of questions. So it's very simple questions. Does her name seem positive or negative in the first paragraph? Who was she named after? Really, really straightforward reading comprehension questions that then get a little bit harder as we go along, moving on to sort of the inference. So you're looking at the text from a top down. What do you think it's about? Then they can read through the text, locate very interesting retrieval questions that are quite straightforward in chronological order, and then moving on to more of the language analysis later on. So it's kind of like layering into the text. And then at the end of this particular lesson, they did a writing task about themselves, and they'd had a good model from the text about what we wanted to know from them about their names. And they really engaged well with it. We heard that some students' names meant a gift from God. Just bringing in really interesting perspectives about them right from the first lesson, and making them sort of reevaluate their concepts and their perceptions of English as well at college. So nothing about the GCSE exam really, and it was really about getting to know them and validating them as a human as well in an English classroom. So I think really challenging those reluctant readers, it's really about emotional engagements into the text. So creating these hooks into the text through a lot of pre-reading tasks. So don't know if you're aware of this book. It's one of those really short readers called Hello Mum by Bernardine Evaristo. And so another approach you could have is take some quotes from the text. You've got the picture, obviously. What do these quotes tell us about the story? He had a gold tooth with a diamond inside it. These are, that was the non-fiction text. Before this is the fiction text. So you can do it for either way of your paper 1 or your paper 2. We do AQA, so it's very much paper 1, paper 2, fiction, non-fiction. And so, they can discuss the quotes, they can sort of preempt what it's about. So already they're getting an idea of what to expect. So when they come to reading, they're not sort of throwing themselves into a massive pool of words. They've got some idea of what they're going to encounter as well. And you can feed in the vocabulary, which they might find hard from the text as well at this point. Very, very, very basic, again, very basic retrieval questions that kind of get harder. You've got your extension task, but what's really important is that you're building up learners' ability to ask themselves questions before they go into a text, which I think is a really important active reading skill that we probably all have innately, because we're quite skilled readers and we don't necessarily think about developing this routine of reading, you know, trying to predict expectations, develop an emotional connection with the text, and then dive into the text. And I think that really helps the learners to engage with the text, to the point where when I did this lesson with my class, they really wanted to know what happened to the kids at the end of the book, and they were devastated when they heard what happened. But I won't tell you what happened because you need to read this text as well yourselves. And then obviously there's a little plenary, again, sort of building up the emotional engagement with the text. What would you do in the situation? And I know that a lot of teachers believe that learners are alienated from the GCSE English language, you know, like they've never been to a festival. If we're talking about AQA past papers for paper 2, they don't know anything about ships, they don't know anything about trains. Well, actually they can all imagine what it would be like in that situation. So, you know, you're up in a mountain, how would you feel if there's a blizzard? You know, all those sorts of things that you can ask students to then engage in that context of the text. So what would you do in the character's situation? How do you feel about the way that, you know, this is being represented in the text? Do you agree that that's a good representation of this character? Do you, you know, so you can really get them involved in the text, and you can make reading slightly more pleasurable as well. But I really believe, you know, like one question per paragraph really helps the learners to try and engage with with each paragraph of the text. And as you go through the year, your texts just get a little bit longer, and they start to replicate the exam text. But I just think staying away from the exams for a little while is probably a really good way of re-engaging your learners. And something else to consider, which I mentioned in the little blog post that I wrote, is to try and start with non-fiction first. Every teenager has an opinion about something, and they judge situations, and they all want to discuss their judgments and situations either on paper or vocally. And I think maybe starting with that, focusing on the speaking and listening as well, so you get to know your students in different contexts, not just as a resit learner who hasn't got their GCSE. And I think it brings a lot of value to the classroom as well, and to you as a teacher and a practitioner. So I'm going to finish soon. So in conclusion, my conclusion seems to have disappeared. Here we are. I really believe that our students are assets in our classrooms, and they bring different perspectives, viewpoints, and experiences. I've learned so much from my own students. I had no idea what the dark web was before I started teaching resit English. I now know where I can get a hitman from. This is great. You know, there are things. There was another point of funds of knowledge, which is important, where it talks about dark funds of knowledge as well. And do we really want to go there with our learners? And actually, if we know how to sort of manage situations, we can go there with our learners as well. And it's really interesting. And obviously, like, start off with tasks that activate language, emotional connections with the task. Dip your toes in the water first. Don't just throw them in a text. I think that's really important. Make the first reading task really manageable and achievable. Build reading into every lesson so that they develop these innate active skills that we have, and they feel confident and comfortable to approach an unseen text by the end of the year. Remember, we're building them up for the marathon. We're not going to force them into the marathon from the first week. And really allow for that freedom of non-exam based lessons as well, and allow for learners to experience English differently and respond differently to text. So that's really all I have to say at the moment. I know there's like masses of really amazing work that's going on out there, and I just really enjoy reading about everybody's experiences as well. But that's it really. So thank you very much for listening.